because I follow the playbook, I expected like, hey, like it's going to book the minute we put it on. And I think that was a little unrealistic. I had very high ambitions for that. And so it was slower to book. But it did start booking, right? And when I think back on it, right, we launched like end of July, beginning of August. When I think between August to October, there were really only 3 weekends that were not booked and everything else was fully booked, right? And so when I look at that, I think, wow, that was better than I expected, right? Or that I was getting nervous for. The other thing that's really encouraging is that I have a lot of 2025 bookings already.
Hi, I'm Wyatt.
And I'm Grace.
And you're listening to our dad and your host of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. I'm your host, Shawn Moore. We're back with my favorite interviews, is talking to short-term rental investors willing to share the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between on their journey into short-term rental investing. And today we've got Miss Teresa Battiller joining us. So Teresa, thanks for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I listen to you guys almost every day, right? So I felt like you guys are a little bit of a celebrity. So I'm super happy to be part of this.
Awesome. Well, we're definitely not that, but we appreciate you listening to us and we appreciate you joining us. So now you'll be the celebrity for the day. So it's, I always, before we hit record, we kind of talk about, and I just say, hey, let's like you and I are just having a conversation, catching up, right? I know the journey and story. I always say, I'm going to ask you some questions I might already know the answer to, but I love having these conversations kind of in a public forum on the podcast because there's so many lessons learned. And one, the successes that we have are really inspirational when other people are, a few steps behind us saying, yeah, that's, I want to do that. That's something that I want to do. But also the challenges that we have. A lot of people don't like to talk about the challenges, but there's so many lessons learned in the challenges and how you overcame them and what we would do different. And so I always am really grateful for people that are willing to come on like yourself and be able to talk about all of the, the whole journey. Right. And so before we start though, let's back up and tell us where you're from, what got you interested in short-term rental investing, and how long you were interested. Because by the time I met you, you guys were running like fast. You were like, okay, we're buying properties like within a month, and we're setting them up and we're launching. And so, but take me back to like what got you interested in the first place and what pays the bills.
Yeah. So, I live in San Diego with my husband and my 2 kids. Our kids are 10 and 15. My husband and I have been in the corporate world for years. Like, for example, I've been working at a big Fortune, maybe 40, Fortune 50, really big Fortune 50 company for 21 years. And my husband's kind of in the same boat. And we're doing very well, moving up the ranks in executive level positions. But one thing to know about us is that we have a special needs daughter. She's never going to be independent, really great, well-behaved, happy girl, but will never be independent. Right. And so, as we were, moving up the ladder in our corporate jobs, we were always thinking, okay, we're going to save enough for her. And we had years to do it. But after, reaching a certain age, you realize, hey, you don't have that many more years to save. Right. And we've always wanted to go into real estate. But, after that realization of like, we're never going to be able to save that much, a W-2 job we're never going to be able to save enough for her. And also, if you think about it, even like the benefits that we get after retirement, like all that stuff, all of that's going to end. And what is she left with? Right. We don't want to put that burden on her brother. So we thought, we need something more sustainable, right? And something that will continue to last beyond us. So we started looking at real estate. And I really started in July 2023 looking into it. And at that point in time, I was just doing a lot of listening to podcasts, watching YouTube, just all sorts of research that you can get for free. I really didn't know what asset class I wanted to go into, right? I was thinking more at that time it was going to be long-term renting because I had a job, right? So I really wanted to be as passive as possible. So we got a little bit into, long-term renting. I went with a turnkey company where they just completely manage it. And that, to be honest, that hasn't been going well at all. But, it's fine. It's a low investment. So it was a good learning. Finally, then, and keep in mind, throughout this whole time, I've been listening to podcasts and YouTube, like tons and tons of research, right? Through like every single day. Finally, we joined Vodacy in February 2024, so earlier this year. And I took all the classes. Me and my husband took all the classes, learned so much, started listening into all the live calls. And just 3 months after joining Vodacy, then I was comfortable enough to, make an offer on a house in Nashville, on a property in Nashville. We closed in May. We renovated between June and July, and then we launched in August, right? So it's a very new launched property, and we followed the playbook from Vodacy. The one other thing I wanted to note is last year, in addition to getting into long term, I started to look at short term. We actually put some offers on properties in Florida, right? But something like a market like Orlando is like super saturated, right? So I got cold feet. I was like, I don't know how I'm going to make this profitable. So I didn't get that confidence until I joined Vodacy. Right. And it's nice to know that going from, just doing research to like now a fully launched property has been a really great journey so far.
Awesome. Yeah. And you guys are super capable, and a lot of people out there are super capable, doing a lot of due diligence or research on the front end. But sometimes, as much good information is out there online, sometimes it's hard to put it all together and really, really compartmentalize that. Okay, does this make sense or doesn't it? And it's got to make sense for you. And you start looking at it, and like you said, you kind of get cold feet, but naturally your instincts are, I just haven't checked all the T's and dotted all the I's, right? I haven't done that yet. And I think even though you were spending a lot of time on the front end learning it and trying to figure out what asset class to go to, but it's no surprise. Like I always like to start with the backstory, understand kind of the motivations, the reason why we want to do this, and kind of the realizations. Like you even said, you guys are high W-2 income earners, very successful in your careers, but even then, there's just not going to be enough left to go around. And when you layer on your daughter and her needs and needs to, there's got to be something sustainable beyond you and John. It's like, hey, listen, real estate makes a lot of sense. And then it's figuring out, how do we do this, right? And so you started looking, like you said, into the Orlando market. What brought you to Nashville? You guys are in San Diego. Because it's still another major market, right? Like, walk me through selecting the markets that you were selecting and how you went through that process.
Yeah, I think we were just looking at where people would want a vacation year round, right? Orlando was probably the most natural place because, from a family perspective, we like going there. But again, it was too saturated. So I just started looking at other areas. Nashville was one of the ones on the list. And I just started to get more familiar with the regulations, right? At one point in time, I even thought, maybe I should go somewhere else because I don't know if I could really bring my kids to Nashville a lot, because of my daughter's situation. But just then learning all the other market regulations, I was like, this is overwhelming. I was like, let me just start with Nashville. I know it's a hot market, right? I'm just gonna learn. I'm just gonna finally put my foot down and do this. I'm not gonna get cold feet. So I figured it would be a good learning, and it has been so far. And so far, it's picked up pretty well. So yeah, that's the story behind Nashville.
Yeah, and walk me through that setup phase. You said it took a couple months. We bought the property. What kind of financing did you guys do? Did you do a second home loan? Did you do investment financing? Walk me through kind of the financing, the setup phase.
Yeah, we did a DSCR loan.
Okay.
So we did a DSCR loan on that. And then the setup phase happened right afterwards, right? So we did a little bit of, I'm trying to think, we did some loans against some of our assets, right? To cover some of the down payment as well. And then from setup, we hired an interior designer local to Nashville, right? And so she was great with the vision. We aligned on the vision. Actually, it was already an Airbnb, an operating Airbnb, but it was not performing well at all. When you looked at it, I didn't know if it was for men, for women, for families. I had no idea what it was. And obviously the numbers showed. So I told her, I want to make this very focused on bachelorettes and girls trips, right? So she did a fantastic job just turning it around. We renovated every single room. And when I say renovated, redecorated, painted,
Right.
you know,
Redesigned. Yeah.
designed. Yes. And now it's like it's focused on bachelorette and girls trips now.
Yeah. And it's a huge distinction, right? When you go through this process, you started to realize, it's got to have you're trying to create this unique experience, and understanding what you're trying to create also helps you recognize people who are not doing that and opportunities in the market when you're in the search phase, right? When you're looking and saying, listen, like, I didn't know who this was for. I didn't know who the target audience was for. And the further you niche down, the easier it is to really speak to a very specific group. And I love that you guys really leaned into one very specific group. I mean, this is built for a girls trip, right? This property screams girls trip. And you guys that are listening, we always put the property links in the show notes. You got to go check this property out. I just recently posted it on our Instagram page as well. It's one of those that just pops. It's obvious who it's for. It's obvious who it's not for. And because of that, you're speaking directly to that target audience. And just for those of you listening, if you're not familiar, the type of financing, DSCR stands for debt service coverage ratio loan. They're very specific investor type loans, and where you come in and the property itself, the potential income of the property actually is what qualifies for the loan. And so you put a little bit more down, you have a little bit higher interest rates, and we're in a high interest rate environment right now. So there's a lot of things, that you have to, there's a lot that to that debt service that we're going to cover. I always say right now in, the time we're speaking in 2024 and this whole year, we've had really high interest rates, really high prices, and really low inventory. All three of those things, when we're looking for properties, not every property works. And when you're able to find something that is underperforming, like you were, and recognize that it's underperforming. I'm always careful to say a property is underperforming, because usually properties perform exactly how they're set up to perform, but you saw that you could raise the bar and get it to perform better, right? By doing certain things and pulling certain levers. And those levers are really coming in and revamping the design, having a congruent design that speaks to a target audience. And your designer, whoever he or she was, shout out, they did an amazing job. I love the design, because it just this property just, it screams, hey, this is a bachelorette party or a girls trip, right? And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
did you just pick that based on the market, Nashville? Yeah.
Yeah. As I was looking for houses, obviously I partnered really closely with my real estate agent. And, as I was looking at other people who invested, that was the advice that they said. They said it's better to niche down. Right. And at first that was scary. I had to take a while to wrap my arms around that, because you think about all the potential people who go to Nashville, and I'm cutting off half of them. Right. And so it's like, oh my gosh, what's the potential revenue upside here? But it really works, right? Because as I look through other Airbnbs in the area, they all kind of look the same. I mean, not all of them, but a lot of them look the same. And the ones that stand out are very themed. Right. And so I wanted to be one of the ones that stood out. So.
Yeah. And so where you guys were in San Diego, and then you hired, somebody to help you do that there. How were there any challenges in that? Like, did you just, you spent the time on the front end to get a great team, and then they took it and ran with it, or did you guys have to go back and forth, or how was that setup phase?
Yeah, no, I have to say I got really lucky with the interior designer, because she ended up also being a project manager, right? And in addition to designing, and she had a very critical eye. Right. She would see scuffs on the floor. She would see, chips in the tub. And she's like, hey, you need to get this fixed. Right. And I don't think and that's exactly how I would have looked at it too.
Yeah.
But if I didn't have her, I don't know how successful that setup would have been.
Right.
So I got very fortunate with her.
Yeah, it's awesome. And did you get her from a referral? I think you just said, but how did you find her? Through a referral?
Yeah, I got her from a referral from my real estate agent. She actually did another one of his properties for Airbnb, and I thought she did a fantastic job. So yeah,
awesome. So we got that. We got it done. We got it, on schedule. How about on budget? Was the budget pretty close to where you were? That setup phase, we always kind of laugh on budgets, because we're like, sometimes they're not even close. How was your budget?
No, I think I did go over, right? Not significantly. Well, I depends on what someone considers significant, but I went 25% over budget, right? For the design specifically. But and so when I think back on it, there are probably a few things I could have cut back on. But I was really all in into making this an experience. So I didn't want to cut back because, I'm not a designer. So I don't know what's good, what's bad, what's going to work, what's not going to work. So I kind of
Right.
just went all in and everything. But there are a few things I think I could have cut back on, but it's fine. It's
Yeah. And I, I've had the benefit of watching the project come to life, and then we launched it, and everything. We're all expecting it to book out for the rest of the year, and then it didn't. I mean, I always tell you, you had a way better launch than you give yourself credit for having. But you were like, okay, we had to make some adjustments, right? It didn't, as much time and effort as you put in, you were getting pretty nervous. You're like, I haven't really gotten that many bookings right out of the gate, right? Because sometimes we you buy a great property, great proximity to Broadway, you put together this amazing experience, like all the things you're supposed to do, all the things that we talk about, you guys checked every one of those boxes. And then we launched it, and then walk me through the launch and kind of some of the anxiety through that, because we've had many conversations about that, right?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think I didn't, I don't know why I just didn't think about how much the Airbnb algorithm would really impact like the launch. Right. And so, I think because we launched the property, before it was finished, and then we took it down and then we launched again. And so when it launched, it wasn't put up on like the first or second page. Right. So I didn't necessarily get that visibility. So, because I follow the playbook, I expected like, hey, like it's going to book the minute we put it on. And I think that was a little unrealistic. I had very high ambitions for that. And so it was slower to book. But it did start booking, right? And when I think back on it, right, we launched like end of July, beginning of August. When I think between August to October, there were really only 3 weekends that were not booked, and everything else was fully booked, right? And so when I look at that, I think, wow, that was better than I expected, right? Or that I was getting nervous for. The other thing that's really encouraging is that I have a lot of 2025 bookings already. Right. So I counted it. I have like around 11 bookings out of 39 weekends, right, that it's open for. So that's 30%. I mean, like my August next year is already fully booked, like all the weekends I have. And so like, I think that's also encouraging as well. And I think we'll talk a little bit about this later, but I started advertising, on Facebook, right, and Instagram. And I get a lot of inquiries for 2025. Right, which is telling me that people are interested in it. So even though it started off much slower than what I wanted, it was a learning experience. I also learned, I don't want to rely so much on the algorithm. Which is why I love the advice that you guys give with the paid marketing. So I'm following that, but I have no doubt that my 2025 is going to be fine.
Yeah,
So
it's going to be great. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because you and I have had many conversations about this. A lot of our Vodacy family, they understand what we're talking about when we, how important that launch is, and how important training the algorithm in the very beginning of a listing, how critical that is, right? It's not, all is not lost if we don't do it right. Like, and you had to experience that is, and we always say, don't because a lot of times we buy these properties and we're going to go through a setup phase, and we're like, hey, listen, it's already set up. It's got stuff. People can go use it. We're going to launch the listing, maybe make a little bit of money, and then we'll get it all fixed. And then we'll take it off while we're putting it all together, and then we'll put it back on the same listing. Well, the problem is, and I know you've heard me say this a million times, Teresa, but I'm going to say it again for those listening, that they understand, because it's a really, really important thing. If you've got a property, you want to put your best foot forward the minute you launch the property, because the OTAs, what they're trying to do, that algorithm is going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you have a great property. They want to see if your property is going to convert with their audience, right? So they're going to give you the best exposures that they can. They're going to put you on the first few pages, and you're going to get a lot of eyeballs. And if you get bookings, then they're going to keep you there, and you're going to get a good ranking. And they're going to say, hey, listen, we're making money on this. 5-star reviews are coming in. This is a good listing. We're going to give it a high ranking, right? But the opposite is also true. If it kind of has a mediocre launch and not that many people are booking it, then all of a sudden you start to fall. And when you get buried, and then all of a sudden you try to say, okay, well, now I'm going to make some adjustments. I'm going to do better photos. I'm going to do better artwork. We're going to, in your case, a whole new design. And then we're going to put it back on. Well, guess what? You don't get back up on that first page. When you put it on, you're buried on the back pages, on the back shelf, if you will, of a store, and nobody's seeing your property. So you're not getting the exposure you need And the only way to get that back, it's a slower process. You got to get a booking, and then you got to get another booking. And you're like, okay, like every booking we're getting, we're looking and saying, how much did that move us in the rankings? And sometimes you have to get 2 or 3 before it makes any difference. And you notice that, right? That's the kind of the pain you felt in the very beginning. And we would have these conversations. I say, you're going to get out. You have a great property. It's a good market. You've got it dialed in. And if you would have launched with really high exposure in the beginning, it would have been a little bit faster launch. But when we look at the actual launch, it actually was a really good launch, especially considering where you launched, which was on kind of the back pages, right?
Right. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
And it's so sometimes when people are making those decisions, that extra, couple $1,000s that you're going to make by having it, by listing it for a minute and then taking it back off, it's not worth that. It's not worth like kind of wasting that initial exposure that you're going to get from those OTAs to get those couple extra $1,000, because it costs you quite a bit on the back end. Right. And like you said, you're starting to get higher ranked. You're starting to get those bookings. Your weekends are booking out. And now it's a strategy of saying, and also it was a good motivator for you to get into and learn paid ads and direct bookings and starting to get your own book of business, so that you didn't have to rely so much on that. And you're getting a lot of inquiries to kind of your point. They're a little bit further out. We want some of those last minute bookings, but your target audience is kind of planning these trips a little bit further out, right? And so it's something that we're kind of dealing with. And so we've talked about, okay, how can we get those last minute girls trips? Like, hey, and who could we target? And I remember originally you were targeting a really younger crowd, right? And I said, hey, let's expand and because there's a lot of girls trips that are going to Nashville and they're older. I've been to Broadway, and there's plenty of groups of ladies that are in that aren't 20, 25 years old. And so tell me a little bit about navigating paid ads and learning that aspect, and does that give you the confidence to say, hey, listen, we've got an offer now that people like. I'm starting to learn how to do that as well, and it gives you multiple lanes to run down to generate income with this property.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think that whole experience with the launch really made me shift my strategy on how I want to move forward, right? Because I was only planning to rely on the Airbnb algorithm, right? So it really forced me to say, like, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to control my own destiny a little bit more. So I started with the paid ads, based on the classes that you guys provide. And yeah, I was targeting bachelorettes, right? 20 to 30, like that was the age range.
Yeah.
And I do see it because bachelorettes, like they know when they're getting married, right? So obviously they're booking their party a year out, right? Which is why I'm seeing like the August, September bookings already. But as I was doing the paid advertising, I've been advertising for about a month already on Facebook, and between the paid advertising, getting all the leads, right? And then also seeing on Instagram, like, just the followers, which very low right now, but still directionally, I can see the people who are actually interested are actually in a not much, but they're in an older demographic, right? It's 35 to 55, right? Whereas I was targeting 20 to 30.
Yeah.
So I thought that was really interesting. So, I mean, now that's going to determine how I advertise and what messaging I say. But, I think, during some of the live calls, coaching calls with you, I mean, you recommended like the last minute girls trip. I never would have thought about that. Right. Now seeing the data, right, I can adjust. So that's been a really interesting learning as well, because that market is different from what I initially thought it was.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I love when you start to learn that stuff, and they're data-driven decisions, and and being in the corporate world, you're used to that kind of stuff, right? We can just kind of take those data-driven decisions and apply them to our portfolios as well, and it makes a lot of sense. And you start to see the demographics of the people that are really interested. And to your point, you don't have to have hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram and everything. You can have a handful that are engaged. You can get a lot of information from them. When we start to run ads, we can start to see the demographics of the people that are coming through and clicking on our links and asking questions and requesting quotes. And you're realizing that your lead times are actually, this is not a last minute booking type of a property. It probably never will be. It's because they're typically planned trips, but you can fill in some gaps with some of those last minute girls trips. But your lead times are going to be a little bit further out. And so that's a good thing and it's a bad thing, right? But the good thing about it is your income is a little bit more predictable further out, because you're seeing, like you said, I feel really confident about 2025 because my calendar is starting to book out, right? And ultimately, that's why I say your launch was actually a really good launch. I know you beat yourself up on the launch all the time, and some of the things that we wish we would have done different. And sure, could we have done a few things different? Absolutely. But the main thing that you did was buy a quality asset, quality area, good proximity to the major profit drivers in that area, which is Broadway. And then you put together a crazy awesome experience for a target audience in the property itself. And all of a sudden that there is going to, one, you're not going to, like you say, don't want to rely on Airbnb so much. Ultimately, that Airbnb algorithm is starting, and you're starting to see it. It's starting to kick in, and it's starting to put your property up in front of people. It's just going to continue to climb there. And ultimately you're going to be saying, okay, now I've got really two really good options. And, I'm excited for this property to see how it performs for you guys, because I know it's going to perform well. And I know at first when you and I were talking, I'm like, you're going to be good. This is going to be a good one. You're like, quit telling me that. I don't want you to keep saying that. I want to see it. Right. I feel like when we were down in Newport having this conversation, we're like, listen, I get what you're saying, but this isn't what I'm seeing. Right.
Yeah. I mean, in the moment it feels painful. Right.
Right.
But now looking back, I see it did go well. Right. And I also started doing some just of my own research. Right. Like I know of some other properties that are like in the same vicinity, right? They're bigger, right? And I've toured them. And when I toured them, I was like, wow, this is an amazing place. Like my property is so small compared to this. But then when I look in Airbnb, I'm actually able to command a higher price, which is also really interesting. So I thought that was, again, it just, again, looking back is like, okay, this all paid off, right?
Yeah.
So it just took some time. I just had to be patient, but overall, I think it went well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it did too. And it just, the biggest thing is because you followed the process to a T from the acquisition through that setup, and then ultimately in the launch, all of that work you did during the setup and the acquisition, getting it set up, creating a target audience, creating experience for that target audience, that's going to do 95% of the heavy lifting on the back end from here on out anyways. And so that's what's nice about it, right? You're making some tweaks right now, but very soon this property is going to be kind of a set and forget it. And we're going to be able to manage our pricing. Like right now, you probably need to manage some of that pricing a little bit further out, right? And saying, okay, now I'm going to start bumping those weekend prices up. This is going to be a weekend kind of, girls trip weekend type of a property. And so the difference between weekdays and weekend prices, that gap needs to be probably a little bit wider, maybe not quite as wide as we had at first. We're adjusting some of those different things and learning that. Once you kind of learn that and figure that out, those are the adjustments we're making right now, but you're seeing the fruits of that labor, and you're seeing 2025 looking really good right now.
Yes, exactly.
So awesome, Teresa. This is when we have these conversations. Like I know we're now we're kind of leaning into. We always say it takes 12 to 18 months to really get these properties operational. Really start letting them hit their stride, kind of figuring out all these kinks. And now you kind of understand why I say that, right? It's not there really is kinks to work out in the very beginning stages of these properties, even great properties like this one.
Yeah, no. And I think that's the one thing I love about being part of the group, right? Is because, just the confidence with the advice that you're giving, right? If I did this on my own, one, I don't think I would have designed it as much as I did and focused so much on that. But two, if it launched the way it launched, I would have been very nervous. I would have been thinking like, okay, it's time to sell. Like I may have given up too quick, but like just all the advice that you guys gave, just like also assuring, hey, this is the amount of time between you getting new bookings. I mean, that was also very helpful. So yeah, it was great to be part of the group because it's really helped me through my journey. And I know it will continue to help, obviously, as I continue to acquire more.
Right. Yeah. And I appreciate you saying that. And it is, but it's true, right? You haven't been down this road before. It's nice to surround yourself with other people that have been down the road a couple steps ahead of you down the road, and can share the advice that we wish we had when we started. And that's why we have these conversations as well, where people can listen in on, knowing that there's times where we feel like we're going to throw in the white flag, and even times when you're like, you're ready to wave the white flag on a really good property. I'm like, I mean, you just did all the hard work. Don't give up now, right? It's not like now is when it gets good. And so, awesome. And so, I mean, I know with you guys, you're going to accelerate this journey of building that portfolio. You have an amazing why behind it, and kind of fueling it and being able to, get this one operational, get it going, and then we start to rinse and repeat, right? And so, as you think about that, like, one, I want to thank you first for having this conversation and walking us through that journey, and a really quick journey for you guys. When you dove in and really, and been learning along the way, doing the right things, checking every box. Like I said, I love when somebody takes every step of the puzzle, or every step of our process, and really puts every piece of that puzzle together. And because then we know on the back end, the rewards are going to be there for you. And I think you guys are finally seeing that, and not, kind of navigating, looking forward into 2025. But so, one, thanks for having this conversation. Those things, it means a lot to me. I love having them. It means a lot to me that you're willing to have it publicly so other people can listen in on it. And, but now looking back, property number 2, like, if you're now going back and saying, okay, here's some of the lessons learned. We talked about some of them. Is there any piece of advice or anything that you would like you wish you knew going into this game? What advice would you give your younger self?
Yeah, I mean, well, this doesn't necessarily go to property number 2, but more like if I was to do it again, right? I think the first one, 2 lessons for me. The first one is I wish I didn't go too big on the first one. I mean, the cost was pretty high on this one. I mean, the interest rate I got was 7.8. It's pretty high, right? And so when the launch didn't happen as expected, I needed to put my own capital into it, right? And that was painful. Maybe if I went smaller, it wouldn't have been so painful. But I mean, fortunately, I had it. I had the resources to do it, so that was good. Second one, I think it's just the mental state of the whole thing, right? Because I mean, I followed the playbook. That was super helpful. I'll still continue to do that. But when the launch didn't happen as expected, I think it's the expectations I set for the first year, right? And I love this quote. Most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years. Right. And I completely overestimated what would happen in 1 year. Right. Based on that launch. I mean, again, putting my own capital resources into it to make it work. But in 10 years, it's going to be fine. Like, it's totally going to be fine. And I think just knowing that mentally, I think it would have calmed a lot of anxiety I had. But, in terms of the process, I wouldn't change anything. I think all that, everything I learned there, I would repeat. And then maybe also with the advertising, everything I learned there, repeat. So I think everything was good. It's just those 2 lessons is the one I would.
And I love, it's one of my favorite quotes as well. I mean, we overestimate what we can do in a short period of time, and we underestimate what we can do in a longer period of time. And because we overestimate that short period of time, it can bring on a lot of stress and anxiety, right? Because we're like, okay, I'm not moving as fast as I thought I was going to move, right? And so, love that piece of advice of just saying, hey, listen, it's going to take a little more time. We need to make sure we don't, back ourselves against the wall by swinging too big and swinging for the fences, or biting off more than we could chew. That's always a really important thing, because if things don't go perfectly, if we bite off more than we can chew, then then we do put our backs against the wall, especially sometimes financial. Like you said, you had the resources, but you really weren't planning on tapping into those resources. And so, love that advice as well. Just, because those base hits, it's okay to take a base hit in the beginning. You don't need that home run property right out of the gate. And this one is, this one's working out well for you guys, but it was a bit of a stress right in the very beginning because of a couple of those things, right? And I love sharing that. That's why I like having these conversations, so that when somebody's either going through it right in the middle of it, they can feel like, hey, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one that feels like this. But also, if somebody hasn't gone through it, these words of wisdom are going to help them stay sane through it and make better decisions along the way, right? And so, yeah, that's awesome, Teresa. Well, listen, I really appreciate you joining me. This has been a really fun conversation for me. They always are. And I can't wait to see this property just continue to grow and get better and better. And I have no doubt that this is going to be one of the top properties in Nashville. And so mark my words, those of you listening, we'll go back, look at this property. You're going to find it at the top of the market very, very soon. So, and it's because of all the things you guys did in the very beginning, following the step by step, and it's going to naturally, the market's going to love it. You guys are doing. I just see how you're handling it. I know you're not managing the property. You got full service property management helping you there, but just how you are involved in making sure that every aspect of the property is taken care of. You guys are going to kill it, and I know the guests are going to love it. So thanks for joining me today, Teresa. It's been a fun conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for all your advice as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be there and happy to have those conversations. And so those of you guys listening, we know how valuable your time is as well. And we appreciate you spending it with us. It means a lot. And you guys know I don't run ads or sponsorships on this show. And so if you like this show, a couple favors I ask you at the end of it is, if you know anybody else that would like the show, share it. That's the only way this show grows, is if you guys share it. So if you know somebody else who would like to walk into this game with their eyes wide open, be part of these types of conversations, share the show. We really, really appreciate that. If you have more than 30 seconds, like it or review it on whatever platform you're watching or listening on. Those things help us as well. And the final, most important thing I ask you at the end of every episode is pick that one thing you can do today. Start building that life you don't want to take a vacation from. Cheers, my friends.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Vacation Rental Revolution podcast. Share this with other people you think need to hear about it. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. Hey Grace, is there a website?
Yes! For more amazing content and expert advice, visit Vodacy.com.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.